you could join us today with this awesome group of panelists who I'll talk about shortly here. But in another part of this event series, we've been working, for those of you who this is your first National AgTech Forum that you've joined, we've been working all year in a collaboration with AgStart and North Carolina Biotech, and I'm with AgLaunch, to put together a series of really interesting discussions, just talking about various elements of the future of AgTech. And today we're talking specifically about accelerating early stage agriculture forward in kind of the context of this farmer-centric innovation and investment model that we actually use here at AgLaunch. First, I want to let y'all know about a couple of upcoming events here. And I want to give a big thank you to the sponsors and partners we've got all working with us to make these series possible. Got a really great group. We've got next month, we hope that you'll come back here and join us for a discussion led by AgStart on dairy innovation. That'll be on October 20th, same time, same place, which is anywhere you are. And I also wanted to make note that we've got, I actually was out in the fields this morning filming our AgLaunch's virtual field day. Anyone is welcome, it's totally free, and we hope that you'll come take a look. We'll talk more about it later in this session, but we had the chance to play around with EarthSense is robot, which you'll hear from Chinmay later today, and also with Spornado, which you'll hear from Kristine again later today. Without too much further ado, I want to introduce you first to LeVert, who is going to be moderating and kind of emceeing today's panel. She has a wealth of experience working with really early stage promising intellectual properties. She is a co-founder and CEO at TechInventures Group, and she is also a venture partner in Pappas Capital. She's been investing and working with very early stage technologies out of universities and then with the companies with very promising intellectual strategies in biotech and ag biotech, increasingly the focus on ag tech. And we're super privileged at AgLaunch to have her as a board member. And so I know Karen very well, and I'm sure you'll all find her questions and leadership here really useful. She is going to walk us through a little bit of kind of the state of the state of ag tech investment. And without much more, I will turn it over to you, Karen, to walk us through that.
Thanks, Connie. I appreciate the kind intro. It's great to be with you all today. I see a lot of attendees that I know. So, but I'll be moderating. I'm thrilled to do it. And I thought maybe it's always good to talk a little bit about the market first. So I'm going to do that. And starting out with financing, annual financing. So this is from Ag Funder, and you all know they do just a tremendous job with statistics in this space. And I will point out that this is farm tech, which does not include agri-food, but you can really see since 2012 the great increase in funding that has occurred in this space. And so the yellow at the top just means, so these were projected, the report was done sometime in July and they didn't have all their numbers in yet. So, but $8 billion you can see here. And when you think of COVID, a lot of times we think, oh, you know, was there a slowdown in financing? There wasn't in this space, and mainly if we were all in person, I'd probably say, hey, what's the reason for that? And you would say that, you know, the pandemic has exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in the supply chain. And what has happened as a result of that, we've seen a lot of companies get funded to help close that gap. And so I'm really excited about this. So this slide, we talked about $8 billion of projected investment. All the numbers that aren't in again for 2020. But I think what's just fantastic is that represents a 40% year-over-year investment growth and a 20% growth in deals. And so you may say, well, you know, why don't those line up? It just shows more dollars were invested, even though we had a 20% growth in number of companies receiving financing 2019 to 2020 40% increase, which shows there was more investment made, which sometimes kind of points to that they may be in later stage technologies. But if you look at the next slide here, you'll see M&A activity. This we created this slide at Pappas Capital. We're in the middle of, and I've known Art Pappas for 15 years, and I went to him because I've been, as Connie mentioned, commercializing a lot of early stage technologies for 20 years. And I just saw that we just have a dearth of early stage capital in this space. And I went to Art Pappas and said, hey, can you help me get a fund underway? And so that's what we're doing at Pappas Capital. So you'll see more information about our efforts to make some investments in ag tech. What's really interesting from an M&A activity perspective, there have been a lot of active acquirers. You can see in the lower right-hand box here, to the tune of, over the last several years, over close to $7 billion and 135 transactions. And what I find really interesting is a lot of these companies acquired early stage technologies or companies that had minimal to little or no revenue. And what that's pointing to is large companies are really looking to early stage companies, much like you'll hear today on the panel, to increase their competitive advantage by acquiring those companies. And so I think this is very positive for the early stage space. Okay, with that, on the next slide, I think we'll probably, yes, we have our featured panelists today. So I've had the good pleasure of having a conversation with these good folks. And what I'm really excited about is them and their ability to talk to you about early stage technology commercialization. And we have Scott Fullen that I've known for a while. He's a grower, and you'll hear a little bit more from Connie how AgLaunch is really how they are bringing entrepreneurs and the grower or the customers together, and really in a really nice model. And Connie mentioned I'm on the board of AgLaunch. I'm also on the board of the Biotech Center that really had a wonderful event over the last couple of days with the Ag Innovation Showcase. So from here, just to give you a little bit more of an idea about our program, I'm going to have each of the panelists give a brief introduction on themselves. And then what we'll do is have each of them talk a little bit about their firms or companies. We'll have some questions that I'll ask. If you have questions in the audience, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll be looking at that. And I may weave them into our discussion today, or we'll wait to the end. And there's, from what I understand, a way that you can do an upvote. So those questions that have the most upvotes will be ones we'll pay some, probably pay more attention to. So let us know your desires there. So with that, I'll ask the panelists to turn their cameras on. And what we'll do for our intros, Connie, we'll have you go first, and then Chinmay, Kristine, and then Scott. And this is just your brief introduction of all of you, so our attendees will know who's around the table. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. So again, I'm Connie Bowen. I am the Director of Innovation at AgLaunch. I've got more of a background actually in the world of venture capital. Again, have been in kind of ag tech venture capital investment with a little bit of generalist tech venture investment most of my career. And I'll talk a lot more about AgLaunch, but the reason I'm here, and I think the reason we have kind of this group of folks assembled, is sometimes in ag tech, we forget to talk about ag, and I'm really passionate about making sure that we have kind of farmer-centric and engaging farmers in this conversation about ag tech and ag tech investment.
Thanks, Connie. Chinmay?
Hello, everybody. I'm Chinmay Sultan. I'm the co-founder and CEO at EarthSense. We've been creating robotics and AI solutions for agriculture since about 2016. We've had almost 100 robots deployed over the last year in a variety of different applications, including all the way from crop breeding to cover crop planting and weeding. So looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you. Kristine, you're up next.
There, I'm Kristine White, CEO and co-founder of Spornado. I actually spent the bulk of my career in environmental engineering. I led business units in indoor air quality and environmental health and safety. And then several years ago, I moved to the microbiology lab that I had always used. And there I took over the responsibility of operations manager and launched several new service lines. And it was actually at that lab where the co-founders of Spornado met.
Thank you. Scott.
Yes, I'm Scott Fullen. I'm a farmer from Ripley, Tennessee, and we farm cotton, corn, and soybeans in North Mississippi and West Tennessee.
Very good. So now what we're going to do is have each of our panelists go a little bit more in depth about their companies, firms, and farms. Connie, will have you take off.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. So I want to give a little bit more context and detail on this farmer network that is AgLaunch. At our core, that's what AgLaunch is. We are a farmer network of progressive early adopter farmers interested in supporting early stage entrepreneurs and technologies and innovations, all the way through really field trials that are proof of concept, kind of kick the tires around, get stuck in the mud, all the way through to pretty smooth operating, getting ready to recommend this and sell actually on a peer-to-peer basis. So when we work with AgTech innovation and innovators, we're in it for the long haul, multiple seasons of trials. We run a number of different programs. I'll talk more about that in a second here. But we, at our core, are trying to bring technology and farmers together to benefit both parties, de-risk the technology, and ensure that that technology benefits farmers. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, but we also, and we are involved in kind of a number of economic development agencies, economic development efforts. We are headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. And as I said, everything we do, farmers are at the center. We run a bunch of programs. Some are a little bit closer to what you might call a traditional accelerator model. But again, we're quite differentiated in that our core offering is that we have agronomists on staff, and we have this farmer network who actually selects and is very engaged in kind of diligencing and deciding which companies we're going to work with. And we use those two assets to really provide a lot of value, I hope, to the startups with whom we work, and make sure we can get these proof of concept trials underway on the ground in the Delta region, and increasingly beyond the Delta region. We also partner with AgVentures Alliance in Iowa, and with SEDCOR in Oregon and Willamette Valley. And so we've got kind of increasing scope outside of just here in Tennessee and the Delta region. We are really focused on making sure we work with farm aligned innovation, and we run a flagship, a challenge called the Row Crop Challenge, where we work a bit with livestock companies, and we're trying to increase that a bit. And we also work on some internal technology innovation projects, where we're really focused on figuring out almost data cooperative models that can ensure that our farmer network can efficiently and effectively work with all of these different startups and technologies that they're seeing, and work together to capitalize on the insights, or maybe just data without insights, that they are actually gathering from all these tools that they're working on. We also, are core to kind of our strategy is diversity of thought, of crops, of people managing farmland and startups. And so that means that we also do quite a bit of work with in the much earlier stage. My colleague here, I'm coming out of a field day here where we had a bunch of kind of some of the local partners in Memphis, focused on K through 12 education and ensuring that there's a pipeline, particularly of Black founders and ag folks who can start to work and get excited and capitalize on opportunities in this industry that everyone here is probably pretty darn excited about. But I won't spend too much more time on this. I want to kind of pass this over to Scott Fullen, who has been with AgLaunch much longer than I have and is super core to our model, both as an individual and as a farmer. So Scott, I'll pass this over to you to introduce yourself and Mid-South family, but feel free to add anything important that you feel like I left off on AgLaunch.
I don't think you left out anything, but I can tell a little more from my perspective what it is. Like I said, we farm cotton, corn, and soybeans in North Mississippi and West Tennessee. And we have 3 different locations that are very different. One is primarily no-till and cover crops and has been for 20 years or more. Some of the other ones we do some tillage, and that's because the soil and the situation is different. I think we've got fur irrigation at one location where we're primarily center pivots at another. And all this leads to the things that I think the Farmer Network the reasons why the Farmer Network can add value. Just the diversity in my organization, but then you start talking about other parts of the country and other situations. A lot of people think that farming and if it works right here, that it'll work everywhere. That's not exactly the case. And we're dealing with weather and soils and different environments everywhere, all over the country or world. And I think what the Farmer Network can do is start putting this stuff in the field and giving advice of what we see and what we think and how this can be of value to the farmer and what the farm to help develop something that the farmer will be willing to pay for, which is the goal of most all these startups, I would say, of making money off this. But what can we help direct a little bit with the idea they have of getting it where farmers are ready to pay for it now? And you've got to put in a lot of different situations and feel comfortable that it'll work to do that. And I think we're set up to do that. The Farmer Network, we've been working on this for, like kind of said, several years. I think officially it started in 2016, but before that, actually, with working on this idea and how it would work. And we've gotten better and learned how to do this, and especially how to handle the field trials of giving more value to the startups. And that's a lot of planning and talking about it beforehand, because truthfully, some of the first ones we did, I don't think we gave as much value as we should to the startup because we didn't know what we were doing. But that's come a long way, and we meet with them and talk with them and try to understand what they're trying to get out of it and what we're able to provide, because sometimes we can't. And I think that comes into what companies we choose to work with. I mean, I'm not really about wasting my time on doing something that I can't help them add value. So that's a lot in the selection process, which a group of farmers, we work through the applicants and try to pick out the ones that we think we can help the most. Did I answer that good, Connie?
Super. Kristine,
Or
actually.
Chinmay first, then Kristine, just because of the slide. Slide's
Okay.
in charge, sorry.
That's
All right, no worries. Yeah, hi, I'm Chinmay Sultan. As I mentioned, I'm co-founder and CEO at EarthSense. We do robotics, especially autonomous ultra-compact robots for various different agricultural applications. We started out, working closely with folks like Scott, trying to figure out what we could do in agriculture that the large conventional equipment wasn't good at and was probably never going to be able to be used for, and then also things that other equipment like drones or fixed sensors couldn't do. So where we landed, over the past 2 or 3 years, we've been expanding in this under canopy data market. In specialty crops as well as in high value crop breeding fields. So we work with a large number of seed industry customers as well as public sector customers in universities and USDA and so forth. And it's really about a very tightly integrated hardware autonomy and AI, machine vision, machine learning solution. That has allowed us to build a really robust platform for enabling future applications that are much more farmer facing. So in the past, Scott's been quite patient with us. Well, Scott's still patient with us. I was like, yeah, you'll get there one day, But the under canopy data should also prove helpful for farmers like Scott to help them make better decisions about what's happening in their field and how to improve profitability and improve yield. And then, a number of other applications are also opening up that we're pursuing. One of the main ones is carbon sequestration. So not this robot, but a robot that's larger and shares the same core technology with this robot, but still small enough to fit within the rows of 30-inch rows of corn. We've been testing it on several acres of planting cover crop seed during the growing season. We'll keep building on those technologies, working with folks like Scott and other people in the industry in different parts of the value chain to figure out okay, now that we have this core technology, what else can we do with it that is useful for various people in agriculture?
Thank you. That's impressive.
So yeah, hi. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we're doing with Spornado. Spornado is an early alert system for crop disease that is changing the way fungicides are used. We are based just north of the border in Toronto, Ontario. And as a lot of you probably know, fungal diseases, they cost the ag industry a ton of money. And yet farmers don't know when disease is in their when disease is in their field until they see it and it's too late. And because fungicides really need to be used preventatively, the timing is everything. Spornado detects plant diseases in the air long before they affect crops. And this helps remove the guesswork and allow farmers to spray more precisely, which can improve precision in fungicide use. It can increase yields. And this is of course beneficial for both the farmer's bottom line and our environment. Here's a little graphic that kind of shows what our system does. It's this simple to use air-powered air sampler. And it holds a cassette that collects airborne fungal disease, which is then this cassette is couriered to a local partner lab for highly sensitive DNA analysis. And then the results are reported back to the farmer via text or email within 24 hours. And the really convenient thing is that the same equipment can be used for any crop, any fungal disease. The only thing that needs to change is the test back in the lab. The system is really inexpensive and it's easy to use. And we've also validated it for in-field tests using portable equipment. And something that we're just started this season for the first time, which we're really excited about, is testing for fungicide resistance. So we can actually help choose the fungicide and not just the timing. So we basically got our start in potato, but now we're working in more than 10 crops, including wheat, canola, grape, berries, cucurbits. And for the first time this season, with our AgLaunch Farmers Network, we're in corn and soybean.
Sorry, Kristine. I don't know. I'm having technical difficulties over here, folks.
Oh, so my illustration, that's okay. You can check out our website for the little illustration.
There we go. Now it's working. It's a fun one.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Installation is just basically, hammering this pole into the field and you let the wind do the work. And that's just a little graphic of the cassette that's sent overnight courier. And in the lab, they do qPCR analysis. So really, really sensitive and really specific analysis. And then farmer or the agronomist, they have their results within 24 hours.
There we go.
Very good. Connie, thanks for the good work behind the scenes too. So I know just looking at these two technologies, and I'm so excited to hear from Scott and how they've worked together with AgLaunch being the spoke in the middle. So we're going to take off now, and I'm going to ask you all some questions if you'd be happy to answer them for me. So just looking at the video, Scott, listening to you, can you talk to us and Connie about AgLaunch? How did your organizations or companies get started? Can you give us a sense of that? And I think we'll start with, actually, let's go to the corner. Scott, we'll start with you.
How the farmer
How your farm, like, are you a
Oh.
multi-generational farmer?
Yes,
Did
I'm
you
a
create the
third
farm?
generation farmer. You know, we've done a lot of different things in different businesses. Farming is probably the primary one now. Like I said, we've farm in 3 different locations with different operations and different emphasis in those locations, but all row crop, cotton, corn, and soybeans primarily. I guess I didn't. What else do you want me? I mean,
Did your dad start it? Did your
my grandfather did.
Okay. Very good. So do you have someone coming behind you that you're bringing along?
I've got a
What's the plan?
16-year-old and yet to be decided what he wants to do. So he's playing baseball and golf today primarily. So, you know, we'll see about farming. I don't know.
All right.
I'm gonna jump in and poke you on that, Scott, because
Okay, go ahead. I'll do better with questions than just
yeah.
talk.
So maybe talk a little bit about some of the cool, like you've done some really interesting. You've like maybe tried some farming in Brazil, maybe some tomato processing. Maybe talk about some of the different types of operations you've been engaged in.
You know, and I think this is one of the things that got us into. We've tried several. We farmed in Brazil for 10 years. And it's just hard to be big enough in anything to make, you know, and then you start talking about doing some of the more specialty stuff, you get into processing plants and things like that. And part of the reasons that we're involved with the Farmer Network is we want a network of farmers to work with, not only work with the startups, but I think there are things we can do, especially when you start talking about non-traditional crops. You need a bigger group of big and small and everybody farmers to group together that kind of are like-minded to try to do some of this stuff. And, you know, so that's one of the reasons part of the Farmer Network. I think another is in the same thing as economic activity. We're in these rural towns in America and specifically that are kind of fading away, and it's sad. And I don't know, you know, you have politicians talk about, well, we're going to get a car plant or some big manufacturing thing. I mean, you know, the chances of that are none. You know, what we have is agriculture and land. And I think if we can develop companies or new crops around that resource, it's got to be good for these rural areas in America. And that was, you know, that's one of the kind of the core beliefs I have of the Farmer Network, and that is economic stimulus for the rural areas. So I don't know, go and ask me another question, Connie. What else?
I'll come back to you.
Okay.
So Connie, how about AgLaunch? How did it get underway? I guess we could get Pete Nelson on here too, but you could.
I did ask. I did my homework. But Scott just started to answer that, right? Part of it is, a lot of it is new crop development from really a rural economic development lens standpoint. Can you figure out how to create jobs, how to create kind of interesting new value chains, really? And what role does technology play in those value chains? And when you start to see a lot of excitement around, as obviously Pete and Scott, feel free to backfill where I miss here, but Pete and Scott have decades of trying to develop new crops and new value chains and working with groups of farmers, because that's necessary to build in that kind of processing infrastructure. And it's really hard to do. It's really hard to scale. And so what role can technology play in a similar way as the way I view agriculture technology when we talk in like investor speak, like these companies that are venture backable, which are awesome and necessary, like those of Kristine and Chinmay, but those actually need to fall into the value added agriculture realm too. They need to also add value to farm operations. And the best way to kind of figure out how to do that is probably to have a bunch of diverse voices around from different regions. And how can you figure out how to get farmers working together and sharing ideas? And that's kind of the genesis of AgLaunch. And I'll just add two from where I sit. And I guess what draws me to AgLaunch and to my knowledge, it is the only model like it. But can you have an alternative system to develop early stage technologies that gives them a pathway that is not just into being acquired by one of the pretty consolidated corporate players, which is great. If that's exit opportunity, that's great. But it's important to have, especially in this increasing, where this increasing like outsourcing of research and innovation by some of these larger stage, whether we're talking about biotech or equipment, it's kind of actually becoming, it's a similar situation there, right? There needs to be some infrastructure in place for entrepreneurs who might not have access to farms or farmers or really know anything about it, but have good ideas and want to work with and listen to farmers. They need that place to develop their technology and scale it and really scale it for the customer.
Okay, thank you. And when we say Pete, we're talking about Pete Nelson, who's the executive director of AgLaunch and the founder, right? Okay.
Right, yes, thank you.
Kristine, can you tell us about how you got underway with Spornado?
Yeah, so we had actually been on the cutting edge of indoor air sampling, the co-founders and I, for many, many years. And what we're doing is we're actually taking what we learned indoors and we're taking it outdoors. We'd been working together at a laboratory for a number of years, and we actually received a request from a crop protection company that wanted a simple air sampler that could be used outdoors. And I'm like, oh, sure, I'll call my suppliers. I'm sure this can be done. Because we'd been doing it for decades indoors. And what I was really surprised is there wasn't one. All that was on the market were some big, like research-based, very expensive pieces of equipment. And further, we found that farmers were having to make really difficult spray decisions, not even knowing that the disease was in the air. So we decided to design an air sampler that was easy to use and inexpensive. And that's kind of how it started, this one project. We kept the IP, and we were pleasantly surprised that, over the next season or two, we kept getting calls from different growers associations, different agronomy researchers, really interested in trying it out in their crops. And it's just grown from there.
Thank you. And did you, with the projects and the beans, did you tell us where you live?
Toronto.
Yay.
Yeah.
All right. Chinmay, how about you? How did you get started at EarthSense?
Kind of a very similar story, actually. So we started, wanting to provide better data to farmers. Our background is in drones and drone autonomy, and this was, sort of in the earlier days of drones. But one of the most interesting thing we heard from, farmers, agronomists, crop scientists, was like, hey, can you make your drone fly underneath the crop canopy? Because that's where we still have to go. Even when we get, we've had aerial data for ages, we've always had, for the last 30 years, satellite data and airplane data and all that kind of stuff. And now we have all these drones we can fly around, but we still have to go out into the field, walk around the fields and actually look under the crop canopy and see what's happening. Because, anything that's important and actionable, diseases, insects, fertilizer issues, irrigation issues, you can't really see exactly what's going on from the air. From the air, all you see is like, oh, some of my plants aren't doing so well. So we started, like Kristine said, like, oh, there must be a robot out there that we can just put in the fields, and then we can focus just on the software side. And it ended up being that nobody had actually made something that was quite right. Either things were too expensive, too heavy, just we were going to end up, even if we started with an outside platform, we were going to end up re-engineering most of it ourselves anyway. So we kind of like, bit the bullet, and we're like, okay, we're going to have to do this from scratch. Fortunately, we were a spin-off from the University of Illinois. So we're here in central Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So all the corn and bean fields that we could want ever access to. Lots of really smart agronomists and crop scientists all around us. And then at the university, we got a big boost from a Department of Energy research grant that was actually designed to spur exactly this kind of technology innovation. It was called, it was a program for enabling high throughput field phenotyping. So essentially like making robots with a bunch of sensors and all the AI that goes with it to make the robots go through and make sense of that data. So that's how we started. And then, through sort of the UFI network, and then also through the AgLaunch network, we started getting interest into this idea. And of course, farmers have been waiting for this kind of data too. But by the nature of sort of this kind of early stage technology, we're not there yet where we can feel comfortable about providing it to farmers, because the performance of the technology relative to the cost is not quite there yet. So we're like, okay, who are the early stage customers for this kind of technology that would be interested? And we've been lucky to have support from basically all of the major seed companies in deploying this on their crop breeding fields and increasingly on their seed production fields. So we've been maturing the technology there. We've had a fair amount of ongoing government funding support at the company also, at the startup also. So thank you for paying your taxes, everybody. We're putting them to good use. And then the next stages are really how to keep building on this momentum. And now that we have this platform for doing things that conventional equipment can't, keep building on that and delivering more interesting options for farmers, including solutions for better carbon sequestration, solutions for combating the herbicide resistant super weeds, which it's crazy. Like every season, I feel like I see more and more fields that are kind of just completely overtaken with pigweed. Can't go on forever.
Okay, so a question came in on the chat for you that small robots in large cornfields, that's an interesting idea. Will farmers have hundreds of these small robots stored in the shed where previously an enormous machine would have been stored? Or is the idea that there will just be a few small robots roaming the fields continuously? Can you answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it very much depends on the specific problems that the robots are trying to solve. So for planting cover crops, for example, the robot only needs to do that, once every season. So it doesn't make sense for the farmers to hold on to it. And farmers are like, yeah, we don't want to manage another piece of equipment. You guys just come in, plant the cover crops, go away, right? So that would be more like a service model. Whereas if, a large grower like Scott, if he wants to have a couple of robots that one of his agronomists, as they're going to the fields, keeping an eye on the fields, what's going on, they can drop the robot off and the robot would scout through that field and produce a map of everything that's going on in the field that they can do something about. So in that case, they might want to have a small number of robots. And then longer term, we don't see ourselves doing planting, or definitely not harvesting, I don't think, or tillage or any of those kinds of things. But for things like superweed eradication, then maybe a team of like 4 or 5 robots for every 100 acres that just live in their own kennel at the edge of the field and, keep that field clean, So it very much varies depending on the application. So there are some things that small robots are good for, and depending on the application, they can either go from field to field, and other things that we don't think small robots will ever do.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like there may be in the chat a question for you. You can answer that directly. So you all talked a little bit about this already. Scott, you mentioned how AgLaunch has helped you. If you have more to add, we can have you add it now. We want Kristine and Chinmay, Kristine, Scott. If you haven't already talked about how AgLaunch has helped you, can you do that now? And who wants to go first?
Yeah, maybe Kristine can go first.
Okay, Kristine.
Sure. I mean, we've obviously touched on the most important, which is access to farmers and getting farmers' input and feedback from day one. But I also want to kind of give a shout out to the program they put together. It was a 6-week, very intensive program. It was virtual this year, but AgLaunch really did a good job of keeping it really interactive. It was really unique. We had so much one-on-one time with the different AgLaunch mentors and their guest experts. And it was great. It was definitely a boot camp. I mean, we had regular homework, we had deliverables. It really kept you focused, and it forced you to really dig deep and examine your company and apply your learning. You kind of stepped away for, some hours a day from the operations and really, looked at your whole company, everything from business planning, marketing, fundraising. And that information that we put together during these sessions, it's really directly helped us with our fundraising and with our day-to-day business planning and execution. And we keep expanding on it and using it all the time. So that's been another way that they've really helped us. And, it really didn't stop with the end of the 6-week program. It continues. We have monthly meetings with them that we do updates, and they're always, a Slack comment or an email away, and always really willing to answer questions and to help us.
Thank you. Chinmay, do you have something you'd add on top of that?
Well, completely agreed with everything that Kristine said. Early feedback from farmers, honest feedback from farmers are always no nonsense. They'll tell you like what it is. But as somebody as Eric said in the chat, like farmers are also optimistic and they're looking for new solutions. So having that balance of like, this is not there yet, but I like what you're doing overall. That's amazingly useful, both as sort of motivation and reality check, and then a flip side or a complementary part of that motivation is AgLaunch actually invested in collaboration with Innova Memphis, which is a venture fund. So AgLaunch actually gave us our first investment. So that's a good mark of confidence, word of confidence to have, to say, hey, a group of farmers have looked at this and selected it as one of the promising upcoming technologies that they would like to have proceed further. And we've kind of built on that through the AgLaunch network. We've gotten in touch with other farmer angel groups, farmer syndicates who've also invested in EarthSense as we made progress over time. So access to real fields, honest feedback, encouragement and motivation, and then financial support as well. All of that has been phenomenal.
Thank you. Scott, anything more to add on AgLaunch, or are you good?
Well, I think it's been a real, we've been doing a startup too of developing the farmer network and trying to figure out how to do this. It's all sounded like a good idea, and we're going to do field trials, and you think you can do field trials, and what we found out is we're not very good at it at first. We didn't know what we were doing. And once we'd done it a time or two, we learned a lot. I think we've got pretty good procedures in place of how to do it and what is expected and what we're trying to get, what information we're trying to get to the startup. I mean, what do they need to know to go to the next level? And, that's been a little trial and error on that, of trying to understand what we can do and what we're capable of, and what companies do we think we really can help? Because like I said, if we're not, then we're wasting our time and their time too. So I think that's been a process of the selection, is who can we really move forward? And it's been a learning process, and we've made some mistakes and come a long way in the last, 5 or 6 years or whatever of how we do that. And I think been pretty successful at it, and I think we'll continue to get better. And I think continue to get bigger and more diverse group of farmers from different regions that will be able to help in a broader way, I guess, understand the technology, and then which also should be the first customers, and be able to give good recommendations to other farmers that they ought to look at this, because we have tested it, we have messed with it for several years, we understand it, and we think it works.
And you hit the nail on the head when you said we've made some mistakes, which are important, right? Winners and learners.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's seemed a lot easier to do before we started doing it. It's like one of those deals you say, well, why don't we just do it? This, sounds good, but it lot of learning involved in that.
Good. So Connie, when you answer like what you've learned from the growers and startups as part of AgLaunch, can you also, there's a question about, actually we can grab that one later, because I'm going to ask you about reach. So you can answer the question on, what have you guys learned from working with the growers and startups?
Okay, I will answer that. I want to build on Chinmay's point about capital too, just as a clarifier too. And I guess this starts to answer this question as well. But we do partner with Innova Memphis, which is a fund. We've got a value at AgLaunch where we partner where we can and we build where we have to, right? And we partner with Innova Memphis and we partner with AgVentures Alliance, both of whom are investment firms, both of whom invest in companies of their choice that go through specific programs. Without getting too much into the weeds on details, we've got a lot going on now at AgLaunch, so it's not quite as simple to explain as I would wish it was. But generally speaking, our investment partners invest where it's appropriate. And we also are in the process of really working again with AgVentures Alliance, which, if folks don't know them, they are a farmer network as well of sorts. They're born out of an ethanol co-op, and it is a farmer group in Mason City, Iowa. So Iowa-based farmers. And they also have an angel network called Countryside Angels, which we're partnered with them on. And the goal of that is to get more farmers acting as angel investors and more farmers on cap tables with ownership and equity upside in these startups with which we work. I don't think I mentioned that before, but that is something that's super core to what we're doing in AgLaunch, is making sure that not only do we want farmers to be sharing and just helping technologies to actually solve their problems, but when you think about companies out in Silicon Valley who have farmers on board as advisors, and they're getting an equity stake, they're getting options, they have the opportunity to invest, and the folks who end up on their boards who are like former tech entrepreneurs and all that are great value adds. It makes a lot of sense if you're innovating for agriculture to consider having a farmer on your board, on your cap table as an advisor with a real vote and a real voice that you really listen to, and maybe you can get multiple farmers. And so there's the opportunity with our angel network now for the companies that go through our programming, and sometimes companies that don't go through our programming. Like Scott said, we're a startup, so we are sometimes making things up as we go and testing things out. But getting the opportunity for farmers to see more and more ag tech companies and say, that has promise, or that would have promise if, and then we can kind of play that out in real time as makes sense. And
I'm going to have you, are you going to the next question or?
I can, that was where I was going to go.
Okay, hit that. And then we're going to move to the
Yeah.
next.
Yeah, and in terms of learnings, I think other folks really hit on it. But for me, it's actually been applications of technologies that I never even imagined or thought of. Like sometimes companies will pitch us in our group of farmers and think that something is relevant. I'll use Chinmay as kind of an example, right? Like, okay, something is relevant for looking at stuff under canopy, and someone else looks at that immediately and says, oh, cool, maybe we could use that for weeding. And like that's having that in the room and like cycling around these ideas about different applications of technologies that people have a pretty strong idea of what they thought it was good for is so fun.
Super. So you talked a little bit, Connie, about funding. Let's jump to Christina and Chinmay. You talked a little bit about the funding you've received, but can you tell us a little bit more about where your funding came from? Kristine, are you still fundraising? Same thing with Chinmay.
Yeah, sure. So we started out with we've had around $250,000 in non-dilutive government grants, which is always nice. And we have raised money on a couple of safes through two accelerators. AgLaunch is one of them, and we have an investment with AgVentures Alliance. And actually, Connie touched on it, but that really helped us with our seed round, you know, to have that kind of farmer network endorsement. And so I am happy to say that we just closed our seed round this month as a priced round. So yeah.
And any corporate funding?
Yeah, so one of our investors is a VC in our seed round, and one of them is a corporate strategic partner.
You see any difference, or do you have to in kind of how they're motivated?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely a difference compared to the VC. The corporate has more focus on partnership and mutual opportunity, with a little bit less of an emphasis on purely the financial. However, you know, with that comes different challenges, right? You know, they obviously have their own drivers and priorities, which, you know, maybe something today, but change in the future. And, you know, it's not always as straightforward and as obvious as with a VC.
Thank you. Chinmay.
So on our side, you know, we think of like customer money as the best source of money. You know, not only is it dollars, it's also a proof, like a vote that we're doing something that somebody benefits from. So we've, over the last couple of years, including this year, I guess, we've passed about $1 million in revenues cumulative. Actually, we'll go 2021 will be over $1 million in revenue for 2021 itself. We've had a fair amount of funding from the National Science Foundation as well, from their SBIR program. So we've had a couple of phase ones, one phase two. We're going after some supplemental funding now. So that's probably a couple $1 million, a little bit more than that on funding on that side. And then, of course, yeah, you know, we've raised a fair amount of venture funding. We're currently in the process of closing a round. We started with a objective of raising a couple $1 million, but we ended up raising almost 3 because the people who invested kept saying, hey, you know, we know these other people who would be good to have in this round. So, you know, we ended up extending that round a little bit. And then previously we'd raised another $1 million a couple of years ago. So that's kind of what we've been doing. We haven't had any like strategic investors so far, primarily because we've been focusing on sort of the smaller market. Ironically, it is the strategic investors who are our current customers, but the investment arm and the internal technology arm don't have the same goals, which is fine. But as we go forward, we're seeing, as we go forward after these larger plays, including carbon sequestration and weed control, we're seeing more interest from that side of the fence as well. And then, of course, larger funds are kind of, in touch with us for potential Series A and beyond investments.
Thank you. Thank you. Scott, if you had advice for these ag tech entrepreneurs, not just the panelists, but other folks listening in as well. I mean, you've seen probably entrepreneurs through the gamut. Are there, like, what kind of advice would you give? Like, what kind of mistakes have some of our ag tech entrepreneurs made that if you could just say, hey, make sure you do these things, that would be great. So that's one question for you to answer. The others around the question in the chat, like, I mean, you have very limited resources, time, monies. How do you make a decision about selecting a technology? So one, any advice you could give to entrepreneurs? Two, what helps a technology get over the finish line for you?
No, I think as far as, what advice I would give to startups is you got to be a little flexible. I mean, in that you come into our program and we put it out in the field and have farmers talking to you, as Chinmay said, we're going to tell you what we think. I mean, and I'm not saying that's all stuff that is correct or the right way you ought to do, but if you're not going to listen to it at all and you think your way of doing it is the way, then probably you're not going to get much value out of dealing with a bunch of farmers and them telling you what they think. So I would think that'd be the biggest thing as far as that's concerned. And I see the question you're talking. Yes, it's a simple question, but not a very simple answer to it. Return on investment and how we decide what we do. If for the same money you save me time, which makes it me get my crop in at a better time, it's hard to put a figure on that of what that gains me, but I would be for it. I mean, whereas, a guy in West Texas, it may be an ounce of water. If you can save him an ounce of water an acre and it really doesn't cost him anymore, then that's not much return on investment, but it's important to him. Mm-hmm. So I think that varies a lot. I mean, sure, when you say you put this product out and it costs me $15 an acre to put it out and I, make $30 more crop, that's a pretty simple calculation. It's not that simple in what we do. And it's year over year. And even I do something 1 year and no return, but then have return the next. I mean, it gets dealing with weather and constants, I guess. It's going to be variable. So it's very hard to put figures on that. A lot of it's going to be, I think, what a farmer feels about it. And if it cures a pain point or something that bothers me, then really the money's not as big of an issue initially. I would expect the return over some years, but that's kind of how farmers think of it. I think a lot of the venture capital, the current system that's in place in the country of supporting startups doesn't work as well in agriculture because our mindset is a longer return. And I mean, like you write a technical paper on an agronomy issue, you've got to have 3 years of research of field trials to even publish it. I mean, and I think 3 years is pretty short because you can't hardly see what something does. So I think a lot of it is going to be based on the feel of the farmer and is this curing something that you think is a problem and causing me problems, and then what is it going to kind of cost to do that? Do I feel like over time that will pay more than a hard number of return on investment? And I was a finance major, so I understand all this, but it's very hard to put a number to this. As I would, because it's more of a longer term thing.
Super answer. Thank you. Connie, what's your reach for AgLaunch? The type of companies that can work with you? There's a question in the Q&A about universities. Do you work with universities? Can you help us there?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm glad that question got asked too. AgLaunch has a number of different programs and things, right? So for our 365 programming and our for our 365 programming, we're looking for a little bit more mature-ish startups. So companies who are maybe a year behind their development to something like Spornado, a couple years behind EarthSense. That's about the stage we're looking at. But we work way earlier stage too. As I mentioned before, something that's really important to AgLaunch is developing the future of who is engaged in agriculture and agriculture technology. And so on our ecosystem development side of things, we actually have a number of partnerships with various universities, in particular with a number of HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Even just this morning, I was riding the wagon through AgriCenter with some of the folks from Alcorn State. They're working on actually, this is a little bit less technology, a little more value add project, but I'll explain it. But they're working on a purple hull pea project and trying to really make purple hull peas a huge crop in the Mississippi Delta region. And in order to do that though, you have to figure out all these elements of the value chain. You got to be able to plant, you got to be able to harvest. That right there, that harvest point is a massive pain point because you need a lot of labor. I don't know if anyone's ever spent a lot of time picking peas. I actually have spent a lot of time picking fava beans. And it's backbreaking labor, and we just don't have access to it in actually our region. So you need a mechanical solution. And so actually Scott was engaged in this too, but we've been working on some of our more value-added side and trying to figure out solutions to that problem. And they were able recently to do a mechanical harvest. So if you're in the region, buy some purple hull peas at Kroger's, I believe. But then we also do a number of programs that are even earlier stage, like what we've historically called a 48-hour launch. And we have a snazzier new name, and forgive me that I can't remember it at this moment. But we do kind of hackathon type projects with K through 12 level students in Memphis locally, really focusing on how do we make sure we're combining these kind of urban agri-food systems, and often these students in regions that don't necessarily have access to fresh, healthy produce and or any access to or knowledge about farming. And how can we make this relatable, and how can we make this an industry that kids will consider as a cool potential thing to work in? And so we do a ton there. We've got a couple of internal projects in partnership with Mississippi State and Tennessee State. We're working on this open market consortium project, which I won't get in the weeds on, but in short, we work with a lot of universities and we've got a broad reach.
Very good. I don't know if you want to put your email in the
I will
someplace folks to reach out. At least get on the mailing list for AgLaunch, because whenever they have programs, they do a nice job of letting you know about them. So my plan as this moderator is to go, maybe we'll go another few minutes, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. When we talked about ag funders, Kristine and Chinmay, did you have anybody any investors that were first time ag investors? So everyone had invested in an ag company before.
We have some investors that are sort of first time ag investors, but they did come in with a focus on investing in ag. And then we have investors that are robotics investors that don't know, don't have a feel for agriculture per se, or don't have a focus on agriculture per se, but they want to they believe in the technology that we're developing. And many of these are sort of, angel investors, technology-focused angel investors. And they definitely have taken the time to learn a little bit more about agriculture, and we've kind of walked them through our thought process on why we are taking this approach and how this opens up sort of the long-term big opportunities. So some of these are new investors, some of these were investors in our previous round as well. folks from the previous round reinvested in this round. So I think we've kept most of them pretty happy with our progress.
Super. Let's talk about challenges. I know a lot of people in the audience, you may think, oh my gosh, I'm the only one going through this. And there could be others around you. Scott, what's your biggest challenge today?
I mean, it's weather. It always is, time and weather. And that's what we deal with when we get 60 inches of rain roughly a year. So we're constantly working in bursts around rains. So I'd say that probably is my biggest day-to-day challenge. On a bigger scope, you've got the world economy and exports to China and trying to understand all that, but that's a whole nother issue. Value of the dollar and whatnot affects everything we do. So,
Good. Connie, biggest challenge?
I honestly think the biggest challenge is in logistics, and like it takes a very long time to get from farm to farm, and you got to have a lot of personal relationships, and that's probably a really big challenge for most ag tech startups too. That is pretty underappreciated.
Mm-hmm. Kristine?
Yeah, it's the opportunities in front of us are so vast. We have interest in so many different crops all over the world, but I think Scott touched on it when he was talking about if you can't help, there's no sense doing it. So ours is always, choosing what to focus on next in terms of crops and regions, because while we can detect any fungal disease, we really have to look at, is this information going to be useful? Is it going to be actionable for the farmer? So yeah, basically our challenge really is, given the constraints of time and money, what do you focus on?
Mm-hmm. Chinmay?
People. Robotics and AI is very, very hot, and we're competing for the same talent that's being recruited by Google and Facebook and Uber and whoever else, and it's tough to keep people, attract people, and then even some ways even tougher to keep people engaged for the long time. I mean, we've literally lost people. They've been poached by SpaceX and Amazon and other companies. So that's a struggle.
All right. I saw a question that I think is a really good one. Scott, when you were talking about weather, there was a question about like, what are the now what happened to it? Kind of hot areas for ag. Like, I think the best person to ask is you. Like, what's missing right now? Like, if when you think of these super entrepreneurs and the talents that you've seen, is there something, a gap on the farm today that no one's addressing yet?
Yeah, one of my biggest things, and we've been working on this with AgLaunch, I mean, is the data. We collect a huge amount of data and pay to collect that data, and then trying to aggregate it and make anything out of it. And even we've done with the precision agriculture and specific from the field, we've done all we can do of making improvements with us looking at it. Like going, looking at this map and making decisions and changing and doing variable rate. We need something that goes, hey, Scott, look at this. There's a correlation between calcium in the soil and cotton yields. And then what can we, then us go to the field and try to figure out what it is. If something would just, I think we get way more data than we get use out of today. So I guess that's, and that's a broad area of talking, but somewhere in there is where I feel like you could make some quick improvements to agriculture if we had better ways to do that.
Okay. How about a piece of advice for an entrepreneur? And if you don't have that, you can, if there's something that you haven't been asked and it's popped up listening to someone else, just want to give you all a chance to just, you know, give everyone some advice that's listening in. Kristine, do you have something top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, in just a general sense, I guess as an entrepreneur, I knew there'd be a lot of ups and downs. You know, when it's your company, I mean, each success, the high is amazing, you know, but the downs hit hard. So I expected that, but what I didn't necessarily expect is it's a job, you know what? And like any job, it does sometimes become a grind, and there are mundane times, and you have to keep yourself motivated through those times too. So, and I've just learned that you need to be able to quickly change gears, and generally be really flexible and open to change.
Connie?
Yes, and I'm tempted to just reiterate what Scott said about listening, but so there's this balance. I think we talk a lot about in early stage entrepreneurship about like coachability, which is great. You have to be coachable. You also have to be focused, and I guess this gets to the other point that Kristine made around how do you focus with a constrained time and resources, and how do you focus with a ton of voices who have valid ideas and opinions and opportunities for you. So trying to optimize that, I have a vision, and I know I'm trying to steer my ship forward towards that vision, and I will listen to you about the potential paths I could be taking, but ultimately being able to efficiently decide which path you're taking is what makes or breaks you, actually. And that's so hard to do. And I actually think the key to having that is having a support network of people you can really suss some of this stuff out with, and who are totally going to agree with you even when they disagree with you. That can be internal or external.
Mm-hmm. Good. Chinmay?
Yeah, I kind of have basically the same thing, except maybe I'll say it in a slightly different way, which is, you know, build a team that fights well, like internally. You can have good arguments about what to do next, because that's essentially what it comes down to. As an early stage startup, most of the things you do, you don't have like clear signals and clear evidence, like this is the best decision we can do. You're making a lot of decisions under some level, some very high level of uncertainty. And, you know, trying to argue sort of in the spirit of debating, and then, you know, coming to a good place, good conclusion from opposing sides of view, you know, sometimes even intentionally taking opposing sides just to figure out how to come what the best possible conclusion is, or best possible course of action is. That's probably the strongest asset you can have. And it's probably also the weakest point, because many of the sort of young startups fail because the team can't figure out how to work well together. Like the team dynamics, you know, the team falls apart because they can't cope with the stress and the uncertainty and all those kinds of things. And having, of course, you know, people from on the outside that can support, and also outside that can counsel you well is important. But ultimately, like your core team of like 2 or 3 or 4 people is going to have to face most of these things by themselves, and building that team well, or growing that team well, like making sure that that team understands that this is the fight we're in, and this is how we can best deal with it. That's probably the best thing you can do in the first, you know, 2, 3, 4 years at least. We're still doing it. You're still learning how to do that better. So it's a process.
Mm-hmm. Scott, we kind of asked you that question.
I've got one more thing though that made me think about. Don't try to do too much. I mean, I've seen too many companies that have come to us and go, I mean, you're going to push a button and we're going to give you the answer of what you need to do on your crop, or not even push the button. It's just going to be there for you. I think that's too long a process for money reasons. Do something, give me the information in a better form today where I can make a decision quicker and better, and then work toward the next step of the AI and making some decisions for me. But trying to do the whole thing at one time, I mean, for one thing, it's going to take 10 years to convince me it works. I mean, you know, and that's unrealistic, I think, in the system we're in as far as money wise. You're not going to be able to do that. Not a bad goal and not a bad fourth or fifth step in your development. But I think you got to get to something that just helps me make a better decision, as one example, or better anything, rather than trying to do it all at once and you get bogged down in that, you don't do anything, basically. So that scares me when somebody wants to solve all of my problems instantly. I don't believe they can, for one thing. So that would be my advice.
Not to speak out of turn, but I'm curious, Karen, about your answer to that same question. And it seems like based on our Q&A, the audience wants to hear from you too. But yeah, especially from a like more technical development standpoint, where like you do actually kind of have to go from 0 to 1. Do you kind of agree with Scott on that one, or what would your advice be?
So I don't even know my question.
Sorry.
So,
what would you, so your question is, what's your advice for your one piece of advice for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so, you know, after I feel like I've been working with entrepreneurs for 100 years, I may not be quite that old, but, you know, the passion I love, and that's why I love doing it. I think the biggest challenge is what Scott's saying. It's like, how do you get from here to here? And in between there is just an incredible, like you talk about the alligators that could be in there, but you know, you have an idea, how do you, and I always challenge entrepreneurs, you know, how do you know someone's going to buy it? And a lot of times we don't get close enough to the customer, in our case here, the grower, to really understand what their needs are, so we aren't like coming to Scott and saying, hey, we've got a solution for this. So I think the biggest challenge is really, really solving a problem. And we can't look at it from our standpoint. I think the other problem is something that I'm trying to solve, and that's it relates to funding. And you know, we'll be one early stage fund kind of focused on precision ag, some crop protection. Precision ag is really broad, right? It could be both of these companies that presented today fall into that. And then crop protection more on the biologic side. And then we're going to put a stake in the ground on indoor ag. But that doesn't mean that we won't be investing in other areas. I think the goal is to, you know, see, even if we can't make an investment, who can we help get to the next step? And I think, you know, what AgLaunch is doing is just a perfect relationship for early stage companies. So hopefully I answered the question in the way you think it should be answered.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great. I think you also managed to address some of the what are your kind of fund objectives, focus areas looking like. So
yes,
mission accomplished.
All right. So is there anything else? We did a super job getting through our questions, and I did see in the Q&A about community colleges, and if there are questions like, here's one for Chinmay. What data gathering sensors do your agribots use? And what navigational sensors do they use to navigate the fields and crops? If that's a quick answer, I'll let you answer now.
Sure, absolutely. So at a high level, our philosophy is to try to keep it as simple as possible. So we just use high definition cameras. So there's 4 cameras on the robot. There are the primary data collection device. And then there is a bunch of robotic sensors, a couple of LiDARs, IMUs, GPS, all of that kind of stuff. And then the autonomy is also leveraging all of those things. So we don't rely on any one single sensor to do self-driving. We use sort of combination of all of these because for different occasions, different sensors perform better or worse.
Super, super. Have any of you worked with any local community colleges or workforce training units as it relates to tech development and innovation? Question is, what could they do better? Are there any examples? It's probably more Connie, huh?
I mean, I can think of a really, I think, and I'm based normally in St. Louis, so my example is going to come from St. Louis Community College has done quite a bit of I think 2-year degrees in biotechnology programs and actually apprenticeships with startups. And so, like, you might have heard of a company called CoverQuest. I know they've employed a large number of people from that program and actually who have been key team members from early days of that company. And that's true of, like, there's a lot of technical assistance in all sorts of the kind of plant breeding spaces in and around St. Louis. So I think that's a great model to look at.
Mm-hmm. Super. Farmers for AgLaunch. Do you try to get farmers with different sizes and perspectives? This is Scott and Connie, probably.
Yes, we do. We think the farmer is more defined by the mindset of the farmer than their size or the way they're farming. I mean, we've got indoor ag. We've got one of the 4 or 5 that kind of helped start this and has been with it the whole time is a 1-acre farmer. So I think it's more based on if you think things are going to change and technology or new crops or new value chains is part of that, and you want to be involved in that and help define it and how it goes, then you probably fit in AgLaunch no matter what size or what type of farming you're doing.
Yeah, just to add, that's perfect answer. Just to add to it, I'm sitting in our office right now, which is actually at one of our urban farms, New Way Aquaponics. So you can go into the other, it's sometimes really hot in here actually because the fish like it to be a little bit warm, which is pros and cons for a co-working space. But yeah, we've got a really broad diversity of farmers in our network intentionally by design.
Okay, I think we've done a great job too answering questions. I don't think we have anything left. So, and it's 5:22. Well, Connie, you're going to say something. If we were, hopefully we're going to, I don't know how we do this because it's virtual, but we all should have brought some wine or beer so we could have like a little happy hour after this, like we're used to doing. But Connie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the questions I saw too is like on farmer entrepreneurs, and
that's right.
and what proportion of entrepreneurs in our network are farmers. And the answer is actually, well, I can't tell you the numerical answer, although I wish I could. But it's certainly more than one startup, and it feels like it's increasing actually, the number of farmer founded or often you see like grew up on a farm but doesn't necessarily want to be a farmer, but sees ag tech as a kind of interesting future opportunity in agriculture. So I think we're increasingly seeing that, and it's an advantage and sometimes it's a disadvantage too. I'll say, like, there's pros and cons, and it's again where you need to have the diversity of network to understand if you're trying to change something. It's a lot easier. I think you can have a really tried and true sales kind of brand when you understand who your customer is. I'll use like Mitchell Hora as an example, right? A lot of folks know Continuum Ag, one of our portfolio companies. We work closely with him. He's a 7th generation farmer, and has had great success and continues to have great success. That's a great farmer entrepreneur example. In some cases, it can be a little bit more like equipment that is a solution that's not venture scalable. And I think that's necessary. First of all, I'm not diminishing it. It's a challenge to work with, especially in the context of a venture capital funding world. And we got to kind of figure out, how do we work with those kind of like tinker style entrepreneurs? And as a mechanical engineer academically, I can say that's all for that. We need more of it, but it's tricky to scale and fund as a startup.
Very good. Does anyone have any kind of closing comments? If not, one, we want to thank the sponsors that make programs like this possible. We're looking forward to the next one. Connie mentioned. I really want to thank this panel. It's super to have entrepreneurs. We've got the connector in AgLaunch, Scott. Super having you with us, and I'm sure the advice that you've given to our entrepreneurs and community will go a long way. Kristine and Chinmay, we wish you the absolute best, and I'm happy to be connected with all of you. So with that, we're going to sign off. Thanks everyone, and have a nice evening.
And thank you, Karen, for moderating.
Thank you.
Oh, it was
Thank you very
fun.
much, Karen.
All
Thanks
right.
all.
Bye,
Take care.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.